Hello, welcome back to TSC Talks, the podcast where we talk about tuberous sclerosis complex and other related conditions such as intellectual and developmental disabilities and autism. My name's Jill Woodworth and I am your host. Thanks for tuning in once again. My guest on the podcast today is Mark Martin. He is a parent to a TSC affected individual. He happens to carry the diagnosis himself. And he talks about his work as an advocate in the community, TSC community, and at large, working in local ERs, giving talks at colleges, raising awareness, and being a point of contact beyond belief for so many adults in the community. He's the adult regional coordinator for Kentucky, Tennessee, Florida, Georgia, Alabama, Mississippi, and any adults that he can find. He will get them to where they need to be and get them hooked in and be a mentor and friend. I was influenced by his faith and how that's profoundly affected his life. I'm setting a disclaimer that this is not a podcast where I share a lot of political and religious beliefs, but I do share whatever my guest is into, and his faith is the thing that keeps him intact and moving forward and inspires his path. So that's a piece of his story here. He's going to share many things have happened to Mark and his family. I was moved and overwhelmed with emotion at times during this podcast listening to him talk. I think you'll feel the same way. Really grateful to you, Mark, for being a part of this community and being someone that's inspired me personally and many others. So without further ado, I will let him share his story. I do want to mention the next podcast coming up is with the Chief of Police, New Paltz, New York, and his officer, Philip Kraus, to talk about their autism occupant initiative in the community. Great couple of guys. I think you're going to enjoy that. So stay tuned for that. It actually may go on before this one. So if that happens, just, erase this from your memory bank. So anyways, without further ado, thanks for tuning in, guys and ladies and everyone else out there. Take it away, Mark.
Thanks, Mark, for being on the podcast. I have Mark Martin here, and you've been involved with the TS Alliance for quite a while. One of the, I'd say, pioneers as far as the members of the adult community. And yeah, I've heard about you through the grapevine, and then we spoke a few weeks ago or a month ago or so, and now here you are. So thank you.
Awesome. No problem. Thank you for having me.
Sure. My pleasure. Why don't we start out and you tell me a little bit about how you got involved with TSC, your experience of a diagnosis, your story.
Well, I was 12 years old and I started having seizures, and they could never figure out why, especially since my seizures were always nocturnal, meaning I only had them in my sleep.
Oh, wow.
And, it was kind of weird, and nobody could understand it. And frequency was probably about maybe one or two a month.
Now, how would someone know? Did you wake up, or did your parents notice?
Well, we lived in a condo, so our bedrooms are close together.
Okay.
So they heard my brother was 4 years younger, and he heard him, and he'd kind of rush out of bed, and many times I'd be making noise, through the convulsion and stuff. But mostly was clearing furniture, according to what he said, and my mother would say later, clearing furniture out of the way and, make sure it's safe.
Yeah.
Their grandma also, there's pretty rough gig there, but, and sleep off the post-ictal effect. But when I was 14, my mother was trying to get some more answers as to what was going on, because someone had a misconception, if you will, and I got hit in the head with a soccer ball, playing kickball or whatever it was. And because when they first started happening, I had 22 in a row. And I was living with my dad at the time. So they took me to the emergency room, and, they just, okay, well, here's some Dilan and phenobarbital, and, you don't look so rough, so see you later. So they sent me home, and I went home and had 22 more. So they decided to keep me in hospital, which was crazy because they put me in a net bed to keep me from falling out of bed, which was.
Was this in the Hartford area?
Yeah, this is at Hartford Hospital.
Okay, Hartford Hospital.
Yep.
Wow.
So anyway, when I was 14, my mother took me over to another hospital across town, and this neurologist was supposed to be an epilepsy specialist. They did the typical MRI, the EEG, and did his neural workup, but he turned around and actually, I'm writing a book, and I spoke about this in great detail. I was really hoping that he can give me some answers. But what ended up happening was the beginning of like 4 years of living hell, because what he did was told my mother, and you're going to love this one. I still get flabbergasted when I think about it, but said, well, they're real seizures, but I think he's making them up for attention.
Oh, are you serious? Oh my gosh. That just like makes my heart break.
Yeah. Well, the horror on the ride home, I'll never forget, because my mother was going up one side and down the other of me saying, you're nothing but an attention seeker, and a few other explicitives that we want to mention here. But so that kept happening. And I remember every time I have a seizure, I'd wake up and, I'd either get yelled at or slapped around a little bit because of her frustration and thinking that I was just looking for attention. So,
I think that a while back, like the doctors were like God. And, as a parent, I can see being like, oh yeah, the doctor said this, so it must be true.
Yeah, no doubt. And that's how she took it. And my mother was old school, and she didn't care about any excuses. And most times, she was just very, very, very cold and stern about it. So,
how hard.
The years went by, and I'm like, I remember, Lord, what's going on? God, please expose this. What's happening here? But all the meanwhile, I was struggling in school. I was like at best a C student, but believe it or not, I pulled off a few A's and B's out of fear of my mother. So
I can't even imagine how you would concentrate at all.
I was under a lot of pressure. I was really under pressure until one day I decided to try to take my life through taking every medicine I can, including all the epileptic medicines.
I'm so sorry to hear that.
And it didn't work out. I woke up to the sounds of beeping. I said, well, this is not kind of like what heaven feels like. And the nurse was like, hey, she was really kind. Here's where you are, and had a NG tube coming through me. They pumped my stomach, all that good stuff. So then within a few months, they put me in a psych ward for about 3 weeks. Then they released me, and about 2 weeks after that, because when I got released, I was out of my protection of the hospital. I went back to my mother, who really laid it on, and I tried it again. And again, it wasn't good. I woke up again. So I decided that, well, okay, here we go. So I had problems. So to keep a long story short, let's fast forward to 1993.
Okay.
So I've always had a hard time with self-esteem. I'm a singer-songwriter, taught myself how to play the guitar. It was really my only comfort to a lot of those times. And in 1993, I had a really bad seizure, except this time, I was like 30-something years old, but this time my mother, I had some failed relationships. I just couldn't keep it together with anybody. A lot of interpersonal deficiencies and inadequacies, and I was nowhere near ready to have any kind of, but I was lonely. I wanted to get out of the house kind of thing, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So this one was so bad, though, I think my mother kind of got a clue as to, wait a minute, this is not attention stuff. And I went to another clinic with a doctor, and he did an MRI, and he said next day, he called me back, said, listen, I got seeing something weird on the scan that I'm not like, why don't you come back in? So I had another MRI. So a couple of days later, he called me and said, listen, I don't know what I'm looking at. I know it shouldn't be there, but if it's not affecting your quality of life, you're good. Have a good life. What he failed to realize was he was looking at was 20, I think they said, my doctor down here in Nashville, according to the last MRI, I saw like 20-something tubers scattered over my brain.
Wow.
And they
were just going to send you on your merry way.
Yep. So, well, let me back up to a very important, it's funny because, I'm a Christian. I believe God works in some mysterious ways. My stepmother, who like I said, I was living with my father. She went to because my mother had gotten her work, and she worked at this luncheonette, kind of like a little restaurant. And she said, well, if you want to say goodbye to Mark before he goes to surgery, and my mother like, what? Because they're going to do exploratory brain surgery. So my mother put a stop to it, made a phone call to a physician who was kind enough to take care of my mom and myself and my brother for many years for free. And he said, listen, you do that and you're going to have a lawsuit because his father does not have the legal authority to say that he can have the surgery. So, I mean, can you imagine if I had had that surgery? Oh, my Lord. I just wow, I got goosebumps when I think that.
Oh, my goodness. No, wait a minute. I just want to make sure I understand. So who was suggesting that you have surgery?
The doctors at the hospital.
Okay.
Because they couldn't figure it out.
So they were just going to do exploratory brain surgery.
Yep.
Oh, wow. Okay, yeah.
Thank God. Well, anyways, so I applied for Social Security Disability because the effect it had on my memory was crazy.
I can't imagine.
I've been in a few relationships. I lost so much memory. People that I knew that lived across the street that I basically grew up with, I can't remember right away. And to this day, I still have problems remembering people's names and faces. And, one of the guys that I run a support group, and one of the guys that is in my group went to church, and I've been in about 4 months now since that time. This is only a couple of weeks ago. And I'm like, you don't remember me? Come on, stop kidding around. It's Caleb. I said, oh, yeah, Caleb. But it still has a big effect on me to this day.
Huh.
But anyway.
Not surprising, though, actually. Not surprising.
Yeah, I know. But I always felt there was something wrong with me. So anyways, I got on Social Security Disability, and I just volunteered. I'd play guitar just to keep my sanity. I play the guitar, I'd go out singing and stuff at different clubs or whatever. And that was a big battle, with the neuropsych side of TS, because I had low self-esteem. Hey, man, you're really good. We like you having you here. And I go to a nursing home and play for the elderly patients. But it wasn't until I got into church, and I met my wife there, and we got married in 99. Well, my son was born, and I ran a group home at the time over in
what kind of group home? Glastonbury.
We had 3 adult individuals with intellectual disabilities at different phases. So, me and I had 3 staff under me. We took care of things 24/7, and so it was New Year's Eve. One of my third shifter called out, so I had to do a double. So I was second shift, had to stay over. And Nadia called me, and my son was at 1. He just turned 1 at that time, and she said, "Mark, I think he's had a seizure." He was in his Johnny jump up, and he went limp and started shaking. Well, as soon as I got home that morning, that afternoon, he was starting to have some what we now know as infantile spasms, where he was just leaking forward.
Yeah.
Well, we went to the local hospital, Children's Hospital in Hartford, and they did a CAT scan, and the doctor, I remember, come back, nice sweetheart. She was a nice young doctor, very pleasant, but she said, "I'm sorry, we don't see nothing. So if he has more seizures, bring him back."
And that's 99. That's about the same kind of advice.
2001.
Oh, so you're at 2000. Okay. So yeah, they should probably know about it by then. Wow.
Well, he kept having small seizures, but
they couldn't catch him on a test.
Well, what had happened was we went back the next day.
Okay.
And it was a Sunday morning, and she was on call still. She was on duty. And I remember her problem. She walked up to us and said, "Mr. and Mrs. Martin, your son has a disorder called tuberous sclerosis complex. Have you ever heard of that?" I go, "Tuberculosis? No, tuberous sclerosis complex."
You'd never heard of it until then?
Never heard of it until then. So they had a nice, sweet old man and doctor there who was in charge of his care. So he was in a hospital, and for about, a week or two, they did all the diagnosis and confirmed it. Well, I called my old neurologist who treated me when I had that seizure in 93, and I told him, what was just told to us? He goes, "Mark, it sounds very consistent with your symptoms." So anyways, on February 1st, I had my son in a high chair, and I felt a very painful, I couldn't breathe in my chest. I didn't know what was going on. So I called my wife. She rushed home, went to the hospital. I had a blood clot in my lung.
Oh, my God.
So while I was in the hospital, they did a workup and said, "You have tuberous sclerosis complex."
Wow.
So to put into words, I don't have any words.
Yeah.
The bittersweet. The relief. I immediately found myself lying in the hospital bed, going through those many years of, wow, this is why. And the more I became involved with the Alliance, and I'll speak to that in a minute, but the more I was like, holy cannolis, I cannot believe this. This is why this happened. This is why this happened. This is why this happened. And I don't know
if it make you angry? Just because here you are,